Welcome. I didn't know I was making this introduction until I walked in the door, but Kevin Henson's been a co-researcher of mine, mostly at long distance for several years. He amazingly took a group of reenactors all the way across the Mormon Battalion Trail, all the way to California. Just an amazing trip. So he is a prime authority on this trail, having walked probably all of it, most of it, pretty close to all of it, on foot or on whatever conveyance that they were using on that. So he and I kind of talk back and forth now and then on things, and he's a wonderful resource for me. And so I want to introduce Kevin Henson.
So just so you know, my research has been, Google Earth came out just about the time I really got serious about the Mormon Battalion Trail. So I've been working over the years to try to take resources that were available in the research that I've been doing and put it into a presentation that could be available to everybody. In fact, in 2008, and that started in 2004, and in 2008 as we were doing our hike, we went back to Larned, Kansas for one of the Santa Fe Trail programs. And after one of the sessions, Leo Oliva and David Clapsaddle came out of one of the sessions, and Oliva held up his smartphone, dumb phone, because smartphones had just become available, and he says, "This is what we need to do. We need to put our trails on these phones." And Denny and I, my wife and I, Denny, just smiled at each other because we'd already been working on that. So what you're going to see today is work still in progress. You will see a lot of spelling errors. You will see formatting errors, but have pity on me. I've got about 6,000 miles that I'm working on across 7 different historic trails. You can get to our work either by smartphone through your app. It's being hosted on my wife's software, Mappin Tour. Or, it's hot enough, I'm just going to live with it. Okay, or you can go directly to mappintour.com, view MBTFS, same stuff. It's a little easier to see on the web version, which is what I'm going to use today. But if you go into the field, you can have it on your phone if you've downloaded it. Now, I will tell you that mobile devices are a little bit quirky. And we just had another Apple update this morning, which means we have to go back and look at the software and try to make sure it's working. The intention is to have this available for people anywhere as long as they have it on their phone. Having said that now, if I can close that. I was tasked specifically to talk about the Mormon Battalion Trail in New Mexico. So I've taken that just a little bit. I've taken a little bit of liberty with that. And so does anybody need a 2-minute introduction to the Mormon Battalion? Excellent. I'm going to skip that then. So specifically, I'm going to talk about Cooke's Wagon Road, the variation that Tom Jonas did not do last hour, and that Tom Sutak is going to talk about what happens after Cooke's Wagon Road. So this is the official map that was published following Cooke's expedition. This is University of Texas, and you can get to it, and it's continuously zoomable. I'm going to leave this up as I go today because I'm going to use parts of that. And I apologize for going so fast, but we have a lot of stuff to hit here. Okay, now I'm going to go over to my software. Again, the story really started in Nauvoo, Illinois, as the Saints are leaving there, and negotiations that took place in Washington, D.C. Jesse Little was sent by the church to try to appeal for any kind of assistance the government could give. Thomas Kane, a reformer and an idealist, recognized the Saints needed some help, so he threw in. His father was Attorney General of Pennsylvania. They co-opted Amos Kendall, who was one of President Polk's kitchen cabinet, to convince the president that this would be a good idea to have some help for the Mormons. And so President Polk in his journal says, "I agreed to have this Mormon battalion of infantry organized in order to help General Kearny, because he had no infantry. All he had was cavalry. So the Mormon Battalion of Infantry was raised to conciliate them, the Mormons, to us, the United States. The Mormons were leaving the United States, going out west, where they knew exactly, perhaps or not. So that's the background, and that's the last you're going to hear about that. So they're raised. So they're raised at Council Bluffs. Captain Allen came up some direction this way to recruit the Mormon Battalion along this part of the Mormon Iowa Trail. He finally found Brigham Young at Council Bluffs. Brigham Young said, okay, this is an answer to our question of how are we going to fund our immigration to the west. Brigham Young dashes back along through this section of the trail to try to raise the 500 men. July 16, 1846, they're enlisted for 1 year. They hike down to Fort Leavenworth, obtain all of their supplies and equipment, and then proceed along the Santa Fe Trail towards Santa Fe. Now I have to break a little bit because here is the Arkansas River, and I'm going to explain these colors in just a second. There's another path here I didn't show, and that's a group called the Mississippi Saints. There was a group of Mormons from upper Mississippi who expected to meet Brigham Young out here on the Oregon-California Trail in the summer of 1846. Lo and behold, they only get to Council Bluffs. The Brigham Young and the majority of the Saints only get to Council Bluffs, and there they get the request for the 500 men. So they're not going to go further west in 1846. That happens in 1847. So Brigham Young and the majority of the LDS community are hung up here at Council Bluffs. But you've got a group of Saints who came the Oregon-California Trail and got to Fort Laramie, Fort John, and found out, oops, Brigham Young's not in front of us, and Brigham Young's not behind us. Oops, what are we going to do? So John Reshaw, one of the trappers, at his little fort, just short of Fort Laramie, says, come on down to El Pueblo and winter over with us. We've got some extra corn. We could use some of the skills that you guys have, and you've got some pretty girls. So anyway, they head down the Trapper Trail to El Pueblo, Colorado, and the Mississippi Saints now make a very temporary community, just the one winter is what was expected, there at El Pueblo. And I said on the tour yesterday, you couldn't go anywhere in the West that year without stepping on a Mormon or a Mormon cricket. This is true. Now, here's where it comes back in the Mormon Battalion. So they leave Fort Leavenworth in mid-August, and right about here, near Ford, Kansas, lo and behold, the Mormon Battalion is headed west, and who do they meet coming east? 6 of the leaders of the Mississippi Saints. They were going to go back and get more of the Mississippi Saints and bring them west in 1847. And they say, guys, what are you doing here, out in the middle of nowhere? So they exchange a little bit of information, and Lieutenant Andrew Jackson Smith is leading the Mormon Battalion at this time temporarily. Captain Allen, the original commander, has died. Smith is leading them temporarily. And Smith recognizes this is the answer to his prayer if he ever prayed. I can unload all the women and children, camp followers, that I have with me, because where we're going into a war zone, and as bad as it is, we don't need the women and children with us. So the Mississippi Saints become important at El Pueblo because they provide a wintering location for 3 divisions of the Mormon Battalion. 1/3 of the Mormon Battalion wind up at El Pueblo. The first group was detached at the Arkansas crossings. And that was under Captain Higgins, and I'm just going to briefly discuss these. You can go to the website and read all you want to. And I pushed the wrong button there, sorry, let me try again. So September 15, 16, the entire Mormon Battalion is there at the Arkansas crossing, and they send with Captain Higgins the women and children, most of the women and children, west along the Arkansas River to El Pueblo. They go by Bent's Fort and have the short sojourn there. And one of the local family members were kind enough, Santa Fe Trail people, was kind enough to show this to us one morning after they served us breakfast. Now that's pretty much to at least a quarter-mile long on the axis that you're looking. The cottonwood over on the right-hand side was the natural spring. So this is an ephemeral pool that in the springtime has water and slowly dries out during the course of the summer. And that is big enough to hold thousands of buffalo. So I believe, given the fact that it lies between two branches of the Cimarron cutoff routes, I feel pretty confident that's one of the locations we should be looking at for the buffalo wallow of the Mormon Battalion. Now that's not huge. But what I want you to see is that there's a lot of different things that you can combine to help tell the story. One of the guys wrote, "We started before the morning star appeared." Well, what's the morning star? Come on, this is interactive. Venus, okay. Now they knew, morning star, evening star. So here it is. Whitworth was an English youth who joined the Mormon Church at Fort Leavenworth so he could be in the Mormon Battalion. We only know of 3 guys who did that. So here's what it is. If you go to a software called Skyview Cafe, you can actually enter in the latitude, longitude of the position you want to be at, and you can enter in the date. So I plugged in for 1846, September 17th, near Fort Dodge, and this is what the morning sky looked that morning. So if you start before the morning star appeared, what time of day is that? Well, Venus arose at 4:30 in the morning. Daylight standard time, anyway. And it's a lot brighter than Regulus, and it certainly wasn't the moon. They didn't confuse the crescent moon. And the sun came up at 6:25, so they're in motion 2 hours before sunrise. Well, how do you do that? They didn't have lanterns. All they had was candles. So this is the thing that you can do. You can start testing the validity and the veracity of what they're talking about. And one of the things I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm not going to belabor that, is that I have found them to be invariably honest in their observations. Their interpretations may not always be correct, but their observations are. And Tom certainly has supported that with the things he's shown over on Kearney's route. So each of these days' tents represents their day's travels. And I'm going to largely ignore everything till they get to Santa Fe because we want to do Cook's Wagon Road. Now, when they get to Santa Fe, there's a change of command. General Kearney is left about a month ahead of the Mormon Battalion. He learns while he is on his way south that Captain Allen has in fact died. Lieutenant Smith, who is not experienced enough to command a battalion, although he's pretty good, is in command temporarily. He looks around at his command of 300 dragoons, and he says, "Whom shall I send?" And his glance goes to Philip St. George Cooke, who is one of the men he's training, and he says, "Philip, you're the man. You're going to go back and you're going to take command of the Mormon Battalion of volunteers." And he's been training his dragoons for 8 years, and he's so anxious to go to California. He would have much rather gone to Mexico, but California's better than nothing. And Kearney says, "You're going to go take command of this group of Mormons." Oh, my. Oh, no. And anyway, he does his duty. He goes back, but he is not happy in the least as he begins this effort. I'll leave that for you to study. And here's Philip St. George about 10 years later, 1858. A good man. I also refer to our good friend Kit Carson, but we'll skip that since Tom has done a good job on that. Cooke reorganizes the battalion. And as he looks, he recognizes, I've got a whole bunch of men who are sick and inefficient. And that's the way he refers to it in his official journal. These men are sick and inefficient. And they still had 20 laundresses and a whole slug of kids with them still. And Cooke says, this is not going to work for me. So, doctor, please go through the men and determine who is not physically fit for the remainder of this trip. And Dr. Sanderson takes about 60 of the men out. About 80 of the men out. Cooke dismisses the laundresses. All the children go with the laundresses, and so the battalion now is down to around 400 men. And he sends them under Captain Brown to go the reverse route. So they back up along the Santa Fe Trail to the crossing at La Junta of the Mora and Sapeo rivers. And then they follow the mountain route back north to the Arkansas River, a little bit west of Bent's Fort. Bent's Fort has all of their supplies because Kearny had told everybody, no, I've taken Santa Fe, so come the Cimarron route. But the battalion's supplies had already gone to Bent's Fort. So those supplies provide the food necessary for the Mormon Battalion detachments to winter over there at Pueblo. So Brown goes ahead to Arkansas River, then west over to Pueblo, and resides there for the remainder of the winter. There's a pattern developing here, folks. So we're going to continue back now to the battalion main command. Well, that doesn't work. Let's try that button. No, that doesn't work. Okay. So the battalion goes back. The main command is still there at Santa Fe after Brown leaves with his 80 men. And Cooke takes them now south down the Rio Grande. When I first started this, they wanted me to take Highway 14 south out of Santa Fe to the San Marcos ruins. And I just couldn't get the mileages. Even after having corrected for overestimates and underestimates of distances, I couldn't get the mileages to work out for San Marcos. So I started doing more reading. I came across Hal Jackson following the Royal Road. And the trail coming out southwest through La Cienega seems to make much more sense, and I think that's the way it went. Now the rail runner comes right along parts of that trail, but down there near Los Golondrinas, where we were the other day, the battalion marched right through that area. Now I don't know that they crossed right at the rancho, but somewhere in that canyon they did cross and camped nearby, and Golondrinas information is here. Now everybody knows that out on the interstates, the big Mormon Battalion pylon, so there it is. I didn't put a picture in there for some reason, but I'll get around to putting a picture in there. Okay, so now Cooke is in command. The first day out, he arrests one of the senior captains because he wasn't in line for roll call. He had stayed in Santa Fe overnight. Cooke is not going to have any of this. Now, Smith has told him these people want to do their own thing. And, of course, Allen and Smith and Cooke are hard-bitten Army guys. So Cooke, already known as a disciplinarian, is going to get these guys into shape. So he puts the senior captain under arrest and makes him walk in back of everybody for the day. A great embarrassment. Now, but things started to come in order, and I'm going to get back to a little bit of that later. As Tom indicated, they're basically following the same route that General Kearny followed down through Albuquerque. They cross to the west side and continue on down the west side. And I'm going to break here for just a moment, and I, again, didn't have time to put this photograph in. How many of you ever heard of Los Lunas Stone? Okay, basically, it's a huge boulder about 15 miles west of the river that has the 10 Commandments carved into it by somebody. So it's called the Decalogue Stone, the Mystery Stone, Los Lunas Stone. And the guy who found it, an archaeologist with some shady dealings in the past, may I say it that way, people started questioning, well, is this really, ancient? Did Hebrews really carve this thing? And he says, well, yeah, I think they did, but, well, the Mormon Battalion came through here. Maybe they did. Well, after a day of hiking, marching, that's 15 miles out to the west. You'd have to do that in the night in order to be back in time for the next morning's roll call, right? Or else you're going to be put, nothing like that happens to any of the men. You'd have to do it in the nighttime. The pace of marching, you would have to, you can't do it on foot. They would have had to have gotten a mule or an animal somehow to get out there and get back in time for the next morning roll call. Plus it was raining and it was cold and windy. A cold front was moving through. So it's hard to get light there to carve that in the middle of the night. And besides, the Navajos were out there killing people and stealing sheep. And, getting a small group out there. So I sent a nice letter to some of the people who keep promoting this theory that the Mormon Battalion carved the Los Lunas stone. It's, get off that horse. That didn't happen. Well, okay, will my mouse do this? Oh, sweet, the mouse works. Okay. Now, Tom mentioned it briefly earlier that the battalion, that Kearney gets down into the area of the Contadero, the Mesa, Black Mesa. And the battalion seems to have camped right at the same place that Kearney did about a month before. Now, this becomes somewhat important because the 1971 trail guide, and let me say also that Tom has also proven that showing Hancock's sketch. How many of you were at the last presentation with Tom? Okay, I'm just going to show this real quickly. This is Levi Hancock. I've redrawn this. He is at the place where General Kearney left his wagons here, down here at the bottom of the sketch. Okay. This is Mitchell Canyon. This is Upper Mitchell Point. And the trail comes in from the north, lowlands, and the battalion camps here. Now notice, 5 rows of tents, company A, B, C, D, and E, 5 rows of tents. He's literally telling us that they're camping according to regulations at this point. That's just delightful. But Kearney left his wagons here, and the road out the next morning is down to the southwest. Well, this location is known in a proven bookend south of Contadero, 2 days. Up here at Contadero is a bookend of a known location. The in-between campsite for the Mormon Battalion on November 4th and 5th is of great interest to me because 2 of the Mormon Battalion men are buried there. One man was buried, I said that wrong. The campsite of the 3rd is where these 2 men are buried. So we have the campsite for Kearney, we have the Contadero. If we could narrow down anything in between, then we could help maybe find these 2 veterans who died and are in unknown graves. Well, Tom and I were sharing notes last year, and I called and said, Tom, by any chance, do you have a picture of Emery's Butte? And he said, well, no, I was kind of hoping you did. Because the Mormon Battalion Trail Guide says it's in section 17 of a particular township and range, and when we hiked the trail, we never found the darn thing. And we looked around, but Captain Johnston with Kearney sketched it. And as Tom showed you in the other presentation, the official artist for Kearney, a guy by the name of John McStanley, sketched it, and then when he got to California, painted it in this, and it hangs in Indianapolis, and I was able to go down and see it. Now this is just beautiful. Emery says there's samples of olivine crystals at the base of it. It's so many feet high, it's so many feet long. The Mormon Battalion a month later says, oh, we found this wall. It's so big and so long, and again, the quotes are in here if you want to read them. But there it is. Now notice, there's this huge rock off here to the left, to the east, the mountains off to the east. This is the Narrows. This is the far side of the Rio Grande. So they're on the west side. This is the east side of the Rio Grande. That's a little artistic license there, but not a lot. And here we have presumably John McStanley painting it, and Lieutenant Emery making his sketches in his notes, and the slave holding their 2 mules. Well, where the heck is this thing? Well, Tom sent me something he had seen in Google Earth, a little shadow of a location. And Ron Kirkpatrick and I, last January, went out, and just dumb luck, the river was low enough that we found Emery's Rock. Now, why had nobody else found it for all these years? It's in the floodplain of the Elephant Butte Reservoir, and the water levels had been so high it had been flooded, and nobody could find it. It was underwater, except when the water's a little bit low, they start tying up the houseboats to it. So anyway, National Forest Service, Bureau of Reclamation, and nobody else had that on their list. They didn't know it was there, so now they know the historical interest and historical importance and the location, so there it is. Now, I have not shown it accurately in my presentation at the request of BLM and Bureau of Reclamation, so that we don't compromise the location. Now, here you go. Emory said there was olivine or peridot crystals at the base of it. In fact, that's exactly what we found there. And so I'm pretty sure we have located Emory's Butte. There are still things out there, ladies and gentlemen, to find. We need to be interested in going. Tom and I both independently pulled the pre-construction maps for the Elephant Butte Reservoir, which shows through here the green line is actually a better representation of the battalion route instead of the red, and I will be correcting that as time goes on. November 9 and 10 is the 3rd detachment that forms of the Mormon Battalion. And they've gone so far, and they've actually been lugging the wagons by ropes over some of the sandy cutoffs down close to the river. I'm not convinced that Cooke and the battalion went as far west as Emory did, as Kearney did with his wagons. There's a little bit of interpretation there that we're not sure of. But Dr. Sanderson says as they leave Emory's Butte, they just proceed up canyon, a side canyon for a short distance, and then they turn south and stay very close to the Narrows. Now, whether all of their wagons did that or not, we don't know, but at least some of the battalion stayed close to the river through the Narrows. On the 9th and 10th, Cooke has seen these men pulling these wagons, and he says, we just can't continue with the wagons. Not this way. So he almost gives up based on what General Kearney had said. But he decides, let's try one more thing. We're going to get rid of as many of these continuing sick men and the weak men as we can. That will increase my rations per man. Instead of 60 days, maybe I can get 90 days of rations. This is just logistical nightmares that these men have to deal with. It's amazing to read it and read into it what they're talking about. So they get to the same place that, or very close to the same place that General Kearney takes off. Cooke forms this last sick detachment of 58 men and one remaining woman to send back to El Pueblo. There you go. See, we're getting good at this. Only 4 women are permitted to continue with the battalion all the way to California. They continue down the Rio Grande for a few more days, and the trail turtles, the people who go out and do a lot of scurrying around in the... See, I don't have a foot-by-foot interpretation of the trail. I don't have access to that GPS file that allows me to do this. Would that I did have it. Maybe someday I'll get access to it, but in the meanwhile, this is the best I can do. So anyway, the guides had put up a sign, Mormon Battalion, turn to the west here, and they take off away from the Rio Grande to a place that had some water in it. They call it Foster's Hole. Oops, sorry, wrong one. They call it Foster's Hole because one of the guides, no, let's try a different one, sorry. It gets a little crowded here. There we go. They get to this location, and down in what is modern Jug Canyon, it's a series of basalt levels of lava, and through which flash floods carry the water. And the bottom one is a slot only about 2.5, 3 feet wide. Well, this was lost. Now this sketch was done, I think, in 1870, and shortly after this, it becomes basically lost to knowledge. And it wasn't until the 1990s that a couple out of the Las Cruces relocated this place. So I'm going to show you if I can. As these phones start getting smarter and smarter, this is what it looks like. This is a pool, holds a few tens of thousands of gallons of water historically. Here is a flash flood seen from above. You're looking down onto a very big boulder that sits in the middle of the stream. And I'm sorry it's not any better resolution, but this photo, this short clip was taken. That big boulder is where I'm going to show you in just a second. So it's flooding on both sides of that boulder. And that boulder, sorry, I need bigger X's there, folks. That big boulder is this guy right here. And it has a memorialized plaque on it that some scouts put on there some years ago. So the guy that was photographing, the local rancher, was standing up here. One of the historians that went out there with me to show it to me said, there haven't been 100 people visit this location, and that was 10 years ago, after it had been known for about 10 years. So that's, how much time do I have? 20? Okay, thank you. So that's Foster's Hole. That was a lost location until about 20 years ago. From there, they start taking off southwest, heading towards Cooke's Peak, which is here in the distance. And then the guides come back and say, oh, by the way, we found some water in this side canyon over here, so divert further to the west. And it takes them over to what they called White Ox Creek, because that's where they killed off one of their oxen that was no longer capable of moving. Now, the defining feature for this, because there are 2 or 3 canyons here that have water flow in them, but the defining feature was they talk about finding the ruins of a small home, an adobe home that was 36 feet by 36 feet. And while we were there, the grandson of the property owner just happened to be coming up canyon, saw us there, and wanted to know what we're doing. I said, well, we're, Dad. I said, would you happen to know where these ruins might be? So he drove us up there just about a half mile from where we were. And, of course, I'm carrying a tape measure with me because I'm a good Boy Scout. And we measured this thing 36 feet 4 inches by 36 feet 6 inches. I think Macho Creek, modern-day Macho Creek, or White Ox Creek to them, I think we can pretty well pin that down as the correct location, and we know where that. And the ruins were basically within their camp, which comprised about 5 or 6 acres, the way they describe it. They leave there the next morning and continue their trek on over towards Cooke's Peak, Cooke's Pass, and Cooke's Peak. They're right along the base of Cooke's Peak. They get to Cooke's Spring. Everything along through here is named for Cooke because he's the first one through there. We didn't name it. But a small swampy place, and this now is where the Butterfield Trail connects into Cooke's Wagon Road. This is the connector for the two. Fort Cummings is built here. The spring was capped by the railroad back, I think, in the 1880s, and is contained in this structure. There are plaques there. Again, it's so stinking remote that very few people get to go there. Cooke's Pass. Okay. The guides. Antoine Leroux is the lead guide, but certainly one of the best hunters and one of the best guides, and probably the smartest guide in the West at the time is Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, who gets hired to help guide the Mormon Battalion West. And Charbonneau goes over this particular pass called Cooke's Pass, and the trail now is being washed out between the two red lines. My wife Denny is coming down the 2-track over here on the right. It is pretty darn steep and pretty dramatic. And Charbonneau says, it's 6 miles across, proved to be only 3 miles across, but it's a rather dramatic location. And of course, just to your north, Cooke's Peak is just looming over you. I won't go through all of the details at this location. Again, you can peruse this at your own leisure as you have an opportunity to do so. Charbonneau and the other guides tell them to come on to the Mimbres River. Now, the choice, of course, here now is to go south past the Floridas or to go further west. Well, they knew the Santa Rita copper mines, which Tom just spoke about last hour, were in this area. And this is the Janos Road that leads from the copper mines down to Janos in Mexico, lower Mexico. They follow the road to the Mimbres River, and Kearney is right up in here, okay? They miss each other's trail by 20 miles or so. They spend a night at the Mimbres River and then proceed over to Cow Springs, Ojo de Vaca. And this is kind of a fun spot. Cooke has really been relying on his guides. He's really been listening to them. But again, as Tom indicated, it's poorly known out through this area where things are at. So at Ojo de Vaca, he literally stays overnight, lets the animals recruit a little bit. This is what the spring looks like today, this depressed area. The spring has been capped, and they pump it for the ranch there. This is Levi Hancock's sketch, and again, I've taken the liberty of editing it so that you can read it. The camp is shown, east is at the top in this case, and north is off to your left. The camp is shown just east of the spring, and here is a small mountain just south of, a small hill just south of the camp. And the next morning, Colonel Cooke climbs up there with a bunch of the guides, and they make a smoke. They put up a smoke signal. And an hour or two later, in starts riding some Indians. And he's carrying a lance, and he's on a horse. And one of the guys is out collecting firewood. And he sees this Indian coming with a lance, and he loses it. he's running for his life, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Ah, the Indians are coming!" And Levi Hancock actually takes the trouble to sketch that into this, and I just find that a delightful thing. So you can go back through all these journals, and at the Mormon Battalion Association website, we have some information back here. We have a list of the Mormon Battalion first person or dictated to their descendant, not third and fourth family stories. These are first and second person representations of the Mormon Battalion Trail. The list is available. I have the links in there so you can follow those and go read them yourselves as they intersect the different trails that you may have interest in. The next morning they get up, they've had their conference, they've decided it's just too risky to go further west. We're just going to go south to Janos, and if we've got to fight all the Mexicans in Janos, we'll go fight them. Well, Cooke gets about a mile and a half out of camp, and he stops, and he knows there is one small well to their west. He stops just dead still. He stands up in the saddle in his stirrups, and he says, "Blankety blank blank blank, I was commanded to go west, and I'm going to go west. Come blankety blank blank or high water." And he commands his bugler, Robert Quigley, says, "Blow the right." And unanticipated, one of the guys shouts out, "God bless the colonel. We don't want to go fight," you know. And they take off to the west, and they go over to Soldier's Farewell Peak and spend a day there and a night. Now from here, they know, and LaRue says it may be better. Okay, now we're getting to the real fun. It may be better, and you see it on Cooke's Wagon Road diagram. Here we go. Oops, sorry. Sorry, the glare is a little annoying here. I've lost my mouse. There it is. So here's Ojo de Vaca, and they come west. They skip the Janos Trail. And they come west, and they camp in through here. And the next morning, they proceed west. Now, here is LaRue said this is open prairie to the west and could be a good route if water is found sufficient. that becomes the Butterfield route, or at least parts of it, okay? But they don't know. The furthest west they went was just a few miles, and they found this water by digging just a few miles west, but really nothing. So they go 15 miles to the southwest that night and camp in a low spot with no water. Now, see this little range of hills right here? Those are the Brockman Hills. And this is what they look like if I can get this to do what I want it to do. Where am I at? I'm lost. Oh, I've got to come in closer for it to show up. Okay, so here goes the interstate. CPAR is right here. Dimming is right over here. And as they get into this area, this is literally what you see to the southwest of you. The Brockman Hills, the Coyote Hills in back of it, and then in the far, you've got the Animas Mountains. And of course, you know, if you want water, you're going to go to the mountains, right? Because the water trickles down through the rocks and stays going through there. So they actually pass to the east side of the Brockman Hills. Again, all of this is in the website. You can have access. This is completely free access. Later, one of the guides says it would have been easier if we had gone to the west of the Brockmans. So we know that they go to the east, and they get up into the Coyote Hills because they camp without water that night down here in the low spot, and they pass the Brockmans the next morning, and one of the guides raises a smoke up in the hills, the Coyotes. Now, exactly which small spring up there, it was a very weak spring, is the way Cooke describes it. A very weak spring, held somewhere between 100 and 300 gallons of water, and that's it. And of course, the officers ride up with their mules ahead of most of the men, and they suck up most of the water. And so the poor guys are reduced literally to sucking it out of small holes in the ground with their straws. Well, that was one of my big questions. Where is that? Well, there's a nice little windmill up in here that kind of gave me a clue, and a small tank that they've developed for that windmill to hold the water. And I thought, well, now that's interesting. So the property owner, I went and talked to him, and there were 5 criteria for this spring that they mentioned in the journals. I told 3 of them to the property owner and left out 2 of the ones that I thought were critical to identify it. So he said, well, try Livingston Spring. That's up in here in 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. So try this one. Go on up in here. And Livingston Spring is been capped. They pump the water over to the tank. But this is what it looks like at the base of Livingston Spring. And one of the things they talk about specifically is the fact that there were small pockets in the rocks that held the water that they tried to suck up with their straws, separate from the spring. So there's my foot standing in one of those small pockets, and it had rained, I think, about 5 days previous to this, and it was still holding a little water. And again, there had been rainstorms in the vicinity in the area. Like Tom, this is much too large of a story to tell with the time we have, so I will commend you to go read a lot of this on your own. They crossed the dry Plias Lake bed, which Cooke is just amazed by. Charbonneau, this is a great story, kills a sow grizzly with 2 shots. There are 2 cubs with it, but one shot goes in and ranges forward through the animal. The second shot, about 10 seconds later, hits the very same spot and ranges back through the animal. The guy was good. He was good. There's some question here to Animas Valley. I have a slightly different interpretation than is in the 1971 Mormon Battalion Trail Guide, relying upon Cooke's journal. And this is a terribly steep descent. This is what it looks like coming into the valley. But when you get to the edge of the cliff, and they're coming off now the Continental Divide, and within a quarter mile of the declivity, you still can't really say anything. It's just still flat plain in front of you. But when you come another 100 yards, this is what it looks like. 1,000-foot descent. They have to rope the wagons. They have to unpack everything, send it down on pack mules. They have to rope the wagons down. One of them wrecked, and up until some 50 years ago, you could still find that wagon, I'm told. And I think I won't swear to it, but see that nice flat spot right there? If I were taking a wagon across, I would use that little ledge right there. And then from there, again, it's open to interpretation exactly how they get the rest of the way down into the property owned by some people who are reticent to let many people into their property. I understand why. But there's a good source of water here. There's enough room to put 4 companies of men, about 350 men at this point. They proceed out of modern New Mexico, down the remains of Guadalupe Canyon, and pass what was called at that time Cook's Rock. Now they call it Camel Rock. This is a sketch, I think, by Levi Hancock. I may have that wrong. This is the Boundary Survey Commission who sketched the rock. And this is what the rock looks like today. There you go. And this goes back to those odd colors that you see on some of the rocks and because of vegetation and things. They get out of the canyon 2 days later and they go over to the ruins of San Bernardino, the old Spanish presidio / rancho. And that takes us out of New Mexico as far as I have time to share it with you today. Thank you.